On this edition of the program, Hollywood's not ready to forgive the Democrats, at least when it comes to their pocketbooks. Matthew Frank joins the show. We ask what's real in our world of chaos with our friend Kirk Bado, and there is a possible special election disaster in the making for the Republicans. But before we get started, I gotta lead with this. What happened this week, or revealed to have happened this week, by Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic, of all places, where he was added to a signal group with essentially all of the national security members of Donald Trump's cabinet, is truly insane. It's what I said on social media is the most Veep-y scandal that we have seen in a while. The television show Veep. In fact, there was already a joke that I saw online that he added Jeffrey Goldberg because he thought it was Jonah from Veep. So I have one big point on this, and then I have a lot of smaller points. And let's get to the big one. Mike Waltz screwed up in a way that should reverberate through time. That is a permanent record level event, that you create a signal group with that many VIPs on it, and you're discussing a bombing of the Houthi pirates in Yemen, and you don't just add somebody who shouldn't be there. You don't add your mom. You don't add your a college roommate. You don't add anybody but Jeffrey Goldberg. And if you're unfamiliar with the history of Jeffrey Goldberg, he was somebody that was in mainstream media, played a very colorful role in the Iraq War. We'll be back to that in a second. But has made his name as being a chief Trump antagonist. The Atlantic, once a paper that surely always had leftist beliefs, but at least was also a place where there was, decent feature writing, now has almost entirely become just a laundering house for anti-Republican opinion, and specifically when it comes to Trump, anti-Trump opinion. So when you add that man to that group, you should never be trusted again. All right? I'll put that out there. You should seriously consider whether or not you should give Waltz a phone again. That's my big point. I want to end that right there. Take a beat, take a beat, take a beat, take a beat. I then have three smaller points that I want to get to. But I don't want to hear anything from you guys about, you talked more about this other stuff than the fact that it was hugely embarrassing. No, I told you, hugely embarrassing. You should take away his phone. If you want to fire Mike Waltz, I could understand it. But you can't. That can't happen. But I do have three smaller points that I do want to get to. Number one is the Jeffrey Goldberg of it all. If you're unfamiliar with the man's work, I would suggest a little Googling of where he was before he was with The Atlantic. If you have ever believed that you were led astray leading up to the Iraq War, well, you might want to take it up with Jeffrey Goldberg. He was one of the people that did that. Now, when you read through his article revealing all of this, an explosive article that has screen grabs of Pete Hegseth and J.D. Vance and Tulsi Gabbard and what appears to be Scott Bessent and Stephen Miller talking back and forth on Signal, where he goes dark on details, are what he says are military plans, confidential military plans about how and when the Houthi pirates would be struck in Yemen. And if this were not Jeffrey Goldberg, based on all the other evidence in that article, I'd believe it immediately. But it is Jeffrey Goldberg. So, I don't know. It is the fact that Jeffrey Goldberg that was the one added to this that lends there to be any credence to the Trump administration's defense is that there was no confidential information on there at all whatsoever. So I have no idea. It is not beyond Jeffrey Goldberg to make more out of something than it is. But also, how on earth could anybody add Jeffrey Goldberg into a group chat like that? If you were dumb enough to do that, would you be dumb enough to share confidential information over an insecure line? Likely. So I don't know. But I got my questions. Second interesting thought. It's about Signal. If you have never used Signal, Signal is something that I mostly am aware of because it was the favorite of hackers and journalists. It is end-to-end encrypted, meaning that theoretically it is harder to intercept the information in between the 2 points. That does not mean that it's totally secure. And in that conversation, I would like to point you to 2 different voices, their arguments for which I will summarize. Number 1, InfoSec expert and listener to this show, MG. What's up, MG? He had a great thread on X, which you can find at MG, where he talks about how if you want to use Signal securely, and there is no sign that anybody on that group chat was doing that, it is the best in the business in terms of reliability that you are talking to who you believe you are talking to. But you do have to go through extra steps, and so it does not appear that anybody was doing that. In fact, if they were doing that, you can check the secure keys that you have with each person to know whether or not you are on with that person. Obviously, nobody did that with Jeffrey effing Goldberg. The second interesting point on this is from our friend Ryan Macbeth, who did a video saying, and please watch it if you want more information on this, secure lines are only as secure as your people that are set to use them want them to be. And so if they are so inconvenient that they aren't used, then obviously you are not securing your information as good as possible. And his solution was the military and any instrument that deals with national secrets should be working on secure smartphones that are issued directly to everybody. And so you can have a more secure conversation than if you were to use an over-the-counter remedy like Signal. So I would encourage you guys to read about that if you're interested in the online messaging security conversation that has been brought up since Signal was used for this. And here's my third thought, and this is the closest thing that we're going to get to any kind of original reporting. I know secondhand that Signal is the Trump administration's app of choice. Everybody that I know that has interacted with the Trump administration or the Trump campaign interacted through Signal. It's what they like the most. And so it does not surprise me that that is where they conducted this group chat. There we go. That's my thought about Signalgate. We will see where it goes from there. But we have a bunch of stuff that's happening. In fact, Mike Waltz, speaking of Mike Waltz, the district that he left in Florida, might be in big trouble. It's all coming up.
The following is brought to you by Just Another Pilot.
Hello and welcome everybody to the Politics program for March 26th, 2025. Your old pal Justin Robert Young joining you from Austin, Texas. Gotta tell you, I feel like $1,000,000 right now. I don't know if you guys are like this, but ever since COVID, I have an inability to not gaslight myself into believing that I am sick if I have been around somebody that was sick. And as soon as I have any kind of proof to say that I am probably not sick, I almost immediately have any symptoms that were psychosomatically driven in my head go away. Does that make me a weird person? Am I a weird? Write in theyoungamerican@gmail.com. I'm anxiously awaiting your opinion. I don't know if anybody else does this. My wife went to San Francisco for a conference. This was her first trip away from the baby. I was solo parent last week. She comes back. I'm very excited. Look at this. We went from solo parent to 2 parents. That means that I can go do something if I wanted to. Oops. Oh, no, she's sick. Even worse, she's got COVID. Oh, geez, Louise with cheese. So she was breathing all over me and the baby the day before she realized she had COVID. And so now we're all on watch. But because it's COVID, you can't just, wait a day and a half and see if anything happens. You got to wait a couple days. So she found out she had COVID on Saturday. She was there on Friday. I figured, okay, if I got it on Friday. If I got it on Friday, then that means that I got to wait until Tuesday to test. All right. So I do. And in my head the entire time, I'm like, oh, my God, I got brain fog. Oh, my God, I got this. Oh, my God, I got that. I bet you the cough's coming. The cough's coming. The cough's coming. Cough doesn't come. So I tested myself this morning. I'm clean. Woo! Having a great time. I'm thrilled. I'm so thrilled that we have 2 guests today. We've got Kirk Bado. We have Matthew Frank of The Ankler. Great conversations here. But before we get to that, I have one more thing that I want to go over. I want to put on your radar because this is an elections podcast. As much as we can talk about government and all that, that does factor into how things go about, elections wind up being decided. But I want to talk about elections. So there's 2 big elections that are happening. Well, 2 states that have elections that are happening. And we're going to focus on the Wisconsin Supreme Court fight a little bit later. But right now, I want to focus on an election that happens next Tuesday. And that is the special elections of Florida. These are to replace Matt Gaetz's seat and Mike Waltz's seat. And Matt Gaetz's seat out there in the Redneck Riviera, well, that seems locked up. But there are a few things that are interesting about Mike Waltz's seat. The first, according to Jake Sherman and Punchbowl, is the money. The Democrat in that case, Josh Weil, raised $9 million. He has $1.2 million on hand. That means that he has spent a gigantic chunk of change to win this seat. Now, when I say Florida 6, unless you're some kind of sociopath, you don't know what the hell I'm talking about. So let me just give you a general idea. This is just north of Orlando, out to the coast of Florida, essentially from Daytona Beach to St. Augustine. So if you've ever driven up 95 from, the tip to the stem of Florida, then you're aware, you have South Florida, you got Miami, you got Fort Lauderdale, Palm Beach. You go north of that, you got Stewart, Palm Beach. And then just north of that, you have Daytona Beach and St. Augustine. And then past that, you start getting into the Jacksonville area and then eventually on to Georgia. But this is not exactly the total boonies. Daytona Beach is bustling. St. Augustine is a city. These are not gigantic cities, but it's certainly not rural Florida. Parts of it are, but not all of it. This is all to say that over $7 million spent as of now is a lot of money to try to get your message out for all the Democrats that you possibly can to vote in this election. And it matters even more when Randy Fine, the Republican in this seat, has raised under $1 million. 987,759, according to Sherman. he has spent all but 92,000 of that. Trump won this district by 30 in 2024. But based on early voting, things are not looking great for Fine. Currently, Republicans only dominate the early voting by 0.3%. The expected final turnout is 14.1% in the advantage of the Republicans. So even that would be half of what Trump did. Theoretically, this is supposed to be an R plus 24 district. The Cook political average has it as an R plus 14. Let me set the stakes here, especially considering Mike Waltz has, not exactly acquitted himself in glory when it comes to being the national security advisor. If the Democrats were to take this seat, it would be a tremendous coup. I would like to believe, for the Florida Democratic Party's sake, they could put everything they could into this. I would say for any of these Democrats that are in the do something lane, now would be a time to go to Daytona Beach. Now would be a time to go to St. Augustine. Now would be a time to do anything you possibly can. Anybody, any Democrat that you believe would do well in those areas, now's the time to head to Florida. Now's the time to door knock. Because it would be materially, in my opinion, as big of a deal to win that seat as it would be for Democrats to win this Supreme Court seat in Wisconsin. Not because one Democratic vote in the House would matter all that much, but it would show the world that the Democrats got a little bit of juice. They can put their shoulder into the boulder and move it up the hill. But then again, who knows? We don't know. We don't even know what's real. Here to talk more about what is or isn't real, here's our friend, Kirk Bado, of Hotline at the National Journal. Welcoming back to the program, Hotline editor of the National Journal, Mr. Kirk Bado. How you doing?
Justin, anytime I get to hop on the mics with you, I'm knowing doing something right, doing well today.
And I'm very excited because I've recently learned of the power of the plant medicine ayahuasca, and I would like to invite you to my retreat because apparently we are now both Aaron Rodgers fans.
I was wondering how deep into the podcast we would get to until we started talking about Aaron Rodgers, and I am upset. I saw I was out in Raleigh this weekend at the first round of the tournament with some friends. Got to see some great basketball, so I was completely unplugged from football. So this morning when I saw the Pro Football Talk headline about it's not a matter of if, but when Aaron Rodgers becomes a Steeler, I got very upset.
It might be announced on stage at the Pat McAfee live show in Pittsburgh that's happening in a few weeks. Yeah.
Well, what's the best case scenario there? Is the best case scenario is that he just is so toxic and he's such a root canal that between him, Pickens, and everybody else in that locker room, that he just does a Jets to us and it gets everybody fired and we get to go a whole scorched earth reset here? Is that the best case scenario?
No. Best case scenario, and in case you haven't noticed, I'm fully talking myself into this already, is he understands that if he is going to have any kind of legacy in the NFL that isn't just the a-hole, the talented a-hole, then he needs some rehabilitation. He was drummed out of the Jets of all places. Yeah. He realizes that there is going to be, he might pine for the stability that existed in Green Bay, and he understands, you want to know what, maybe I announced that I'm coming back to the Steelers. I'm on Pat McAfee's live show, and guess what? That's my only Pat McAfee appearance of the year. Past that, we're not doing the weekly. I'm going to give you my every thought about politics, medicine, and philosophy. Now I'm just going to dial in. He still has a strong arm. We have a maturing offensive line. We're going to have probably a second round, third round running back because it's a very good running back draft. And combined with Jaylen Warren and 2 deep threats, he's going to be able to have time, and it's going to play to his strength. And also, whenever there's an ACL thing, it's always the year after the year that you can actually expect whatever you can expect from him. So that's the best case scenario. And then he's there for a year. He mentors whoever we get out of the draft the next year, and then that is the end of Aaron Rodgers' career. That's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is that Mike Tomlin is coaching the Las Vegas Raiders in 3 years because it does totally end every bit of stability that the Steelers have crafted by the fact that there have been more popes than Pittsburgh Steelers coaches over the last 50 years.
No, I see that as the path, but also, if anyone can get a handle on Aaron Rodgers, it's Mike Tomlin. Think about all that he's had to deal with and all the personalities he's had to deal with in the past. But if he coaches them to a winning record in the regular season and at least a playoff win, I don't know how you can't not consider him for coach of the year, considering everything that he's going to have to deal with here. He's going to need the buy-in from Rodgers here. But this is not a great spot to be for the Pittsburgh Steelers at all. When we're between Russell Wilson and Aaron Rodgers, and it looks like Aaron Rodgers is going to be the one we're bringing to the dance here, those last few games with the Jets, he just did not want to get hit. And I'm worried that offensive line that we have is not going to be
either that offensive line is good this year or we have bigger problems than Aaron Rodgers.
Right.
Because we've put a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of draft capital into that line. So if that line's not good, not okay, not improving, good, then there are bigger problems that we're going to have. All right. Look, I know there's people, sports ball people, save your emails. We're done with sports talk for now. You can hang up and listen. I want to offer you a few things, and I want to ask you what is real. And the reason why I bring this up is because I just finished Fight, the new Jonathan Allen and Amy Parnes book that's coming out next month. And it was fun walking down memory lane. It already feels like it was a decade ago, the election that happened last year, despite the fact that it was only like 5 months. But a lot of the things that seemed like a gigantic deal at the time now seem quaint. And it's like, oh, I remember that. They're member berries at this point. A lot of noise around this administration, and I want to ask you, what's real? What do you think we're going to be talking about in 6 months and isn't just going to be a ephemera in the breeze? And I'm just going to throw a few things out. You can take from it if you want, or you can bring me something totally new. The legislative agenda of Trump. We have the special elections in Florida. We have Bernie Sanders and AOC getting, depending on who's tracking the GPS data, anywhere between 20 and 34,000 people, which is very big, right? Or the court stuff that is happening. And just breaking as we are recording this on Monday, apparently the what is he? The EIC or the publisher of the Atlantic?
The EIC, Jeffrey Goldberg.
The EIC, Jeffrey Goldberg of the Atlantic, apparently being added to a signal group with the entire Trump cabinet discussing the bombing of the Houthi pirates. Anything in there that you think we're going to be talking about in 6 months?
How long do you think until someone goes, I'm sick and tired of hearing about your damn Signal account here? Like it's the private email server. I don't think we'll necessarily be talking about the Signal group chat, but to prepare for this kind of moment here, and even before you and I talked about coming on here today, I was looking back in the Hotline archives and National Journal archives about what we were covering this time 8 years ago during Trump's first term, all the way back in 2017. What was the big to-do there? There's a lot of talk about the New York's mayor race, about a guy named Eric Adams. Wonder what's going to happen to him here. Not Eric Adams. That was, sorry, strike that from.
That was 4 years ago. Yeah.
That was I was looking in increments. What we were talking about 8 years ago, though, was Republicans still riding pretty high from the election when Democrats were in disarray. There were talks about the efforts to repeal the Affordable Care Act, and everyone was talking about how deep in the wilderness were Democrats and what was Hillary Clinton going to do next. So when I think about it like that, I think about what then played 6 months later in right when the midterms started to come into focus here. And after their failed efforts to repeal the ACA, that became Democrats' huge sticking point in a tat line going into the midterms. Now, not only did it benefit them pretty handily, they flipped 40 plus seats. Obviously there's a historic nature of the party in power loses seats in the first midterm, but they chose not Trump corruption, not the Russian investigation stuff that was also in the air at the time, but healthcare cuts as what was going to deliver the day there. And if I think 30,000 feet here about what we're going to be talking about, over the summer as the midterms start coming into focus a little bit more, it's going to be what comes up in this next legislative session they have here. For as much as Trump has kind of run roughshod over the courts, how he's issued a record number of executive orders, a lot of that stuff doesn't necessarily have the same type of sticking power. It's been remarkable about how little legislation has been passed during the first 3 months or so of this new Republican trifecta here. Again, they have the trifecta. You should think that there's going to be more legislation. There really hasn't been. So what comes out of this budget framework debate between the Senate and House Republicans? How much is Medicaid going to be under the gun here? That's going to matter a whole lot. The Trump court stuff, I think, is going to have a little bit longer tail because it's not going to be one final ending here. It's going to be a few big weeks in court here over the next few months. And that story is just going to be dripping the entire time. Kind of like how Trump's court fights during the campaign where every few weeks you would see that flare up. But I think we haven't seen yet the one news story, the one big Trump event that we're still going to be talking about in 6 months from now. I think that's going to have to be something from Congress once they start really hitting the road here.
I very much agree. The one thing about the court stuff, if we're going to look down the road for Democrats, is that I would be very, very careful about how much we talk about, we being the Democrats, speaking for them, that they talk about the sanctity of the courts, and we need to pay attention to the judges. We need to pay attention to these rulings. This is really the guardrail of history. Because, spoiler alert, a lot of these are going to get to the Supreme Court, and then they're not going to go your way. And you're going to wind up having to talk about how, the judiciary is perverted and it's bought off, and we need to pack the court.
It's a miscarriage of justice from the Roberts Court. Exactly. Clarence Thomas is the real Chief Justice. That's
look at his RV, the RV. So that's going to be. I think from their perspective, and look, there's a lot of the Democrats not being able to look past their nose to save their face when it comes to messaging lately. But I would say with that, I agree with you because I think that story is going to change. It's going to evolve by the time that we get to 6 months from now. The deliberations between the House and the Senate are what matter. And it's also the reason why I didn't really have a big topic for you here today, because this is the stuff that almost made me quit doing the podcast 4 years ago with the Build Back Better bill, where it's just now we are in truly, I don't care how much you love politics. I don't care how much you love legislating. This is by far the worst part about this job, which is following every little rumor that comes from every House aide, every senatorial staff member. They're all trying to leak little things for a million different reasons, and everyone's just in this funhouse mirror of what the negotiations are. And eventually we're going to get to a point, but good God, do I wish we had a fast forward button.
It's going to be like the last 3 minutes of a bunch of the tournament games this weekend, where we are going to be litigating the replay to the most minute. Did the tip of his finger touch the ball out of bounds when it got slammed out of his hand? That's what the next 3 weeks are going to be like. It is going to be those 3 basketball minutes at the end of a game that actually take about a half hour or so.
Yes.
Before we jumped on the mics here, I was trying to do a little prep work and reading about what to expect from this legislative session. I had to read the first 3 paragraphs of some of these 3-4 times to understand, okay, what are the demands right now? What is the latest little backroom stuff that you're talking about between, like, maybe a staffer got to Jake Sherman's ear, or Politico has a connection over in this camp over here. What's the status of this one big beautiful bill? The problem is that is going to be what is going to dominate politics for a little bit here for the next 3 weeks until they go on Easter break. I think this stuff about the pressure for Chuck Schumer to step down, I think that's just a stand-in for a larger frustration the Democrats have with their leadership right now, with nothing real coming from it. I think the Bernie Sanders AOC tour that you're talking about right now is the closest thing to the 2017 resistance that we have right now, which could give Democrats some hope here. I mean, especially if you look around at some of the other leaders of the Democratic Party, Bernie Sanders, how old is he now? In his 80s? Said he's not going to run.
He's in his 80s, so he's not going to run.
He said he's not going to run for president again.
Yeah.
Chuck Schumer, also on the older end. Nancy Pelosi, she's also getting up there as well. There's that story in the Times from over the weekend about will she, won't she retire? So there is this generation of Democratic leadership that's on the way out. And I think the most exciting thing for them right now is thinking about that next generation of leaders coming up through. But even then, that's not going to change over the next 3 weeks here. That's going to be a 2-3 year.
In politics, we're excited for the next generation is a decade-long affair. Like, this does not happen overnight. I'll put it this way. Mitch McConnell's retirement was on the wall for 4 years before he actually made the decision, and then he decided to stay for the rest of his term, and that will end during the midterm. So it's like nothing like that moves in any kind of haste. So if you were the Democrats and that's your ray of sunshine, holy crap, is that a microscopic dot in a pretty dark hallway.
Yeah, and you're worried that oncoming light that you're running toward could also be a truck coming your way with how these leaders have been behaving. Like, it's really, for Democrats right now, there's not a whole lot of effective means of resistance. At the beginning of this Trump administration, you and I were talking about what does a competent Trump administration look like. And it does seem like, for the most part, they are being very effective with their executive action. They're very effective in their stiff arming of the media. You and I caution that let's see when the rubber meets the road, when the legislating starts here. I almost want to imagine, like, what does an effective Democratic resistance look like right now for them, because they don't have enough votes to stall out a budget. They don't have any real official ways that they can. All the nominations got through except for Elise Stefanik, which is her nomination to the cabinet. Is going to come through pretty easily. That's the last remaining cabinet level position they have. So there's not much resistance to be had there. If you're looking for silver lining for Democrats, you could look at some of the special election performances. There were those pair in Iowa where Democrats overperformed, which is good news for them. Their Republicans are starting to sweat out at least one of the special elections down in Florida because the Democrat there is just raising money hand over fist. But
that's what we're going to talk about in the A block here, which I think, look, there's a lot being made about it, and we're going to find out what happens in a week. But if you are jumping up and down because you spent $9 million to only get blown out by 20 as opposed to 30, then, like, look, cold comfort. I think that the Florida Democrats need to learn how to lose better. So good for them. They're going to learn how to lose better. But I don't know exactly how much it says. I think it says, hey, you can lose by one less percentage point for every $1 million that you put in, while your opponent puts in 12 cents.
Well, and how much of that money is actually going to campaigning too? There's a great series of stories from the last few election cycles about the kind of the grift going on with these lawn shot candidates in these deep red or blue districts, where they are raising money hand over fist because, like the Democrat running against Marjorie Taylor Greene broke House fundraising records here. He still lost by 30, 40 points, whatever it was. But meanwhile, like, the digital consultants he had are just making money hand over fist. It's the same type of spending pattern here in Florida too, where the Democrats are raising about $10 million or so, and $4 million of that goes to a digital consultant to help get their name out there. So, there's a lot of money to be made. There's a lot of grift to be had in some of these long shot races, especially if you can appeal to a larger national electorate here right now. But that's just not going to necessarily put wins on the board here for either party.
I mean, look, I know right now that one of the big arcs I'm going to have between now and the midterms is going to be noted Jon Ossoff non-believer. Because there's a lot of Ossoff belief, at least in my orbit, that I see online. And I don't blame anybody. I know the perspective. I get where you're coming from. I don't believe in him. And there was a clip of him yesterday that he put out that everybody got all excited about. And they're all like, oh my God, Ossoff. He's really good at this. And it was him railing against like, oh, Trump is the elites that he says that he is running against, blah, 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 blah. It reminded me so much of Beto. It reminded me so much of the candidates that you're talking about, which are polished candidates that are there to raise money from places that aren't where they need to win an election. And granted, I would put Ossoff above anybody not named Brian Kemp. We'll find out if Brian Kemp, as is rumored, is going to run against him. I think he would be an underdog to Brian Kemp because I know that whenever I see Brian Kemp and Brian Kemp is talking, he's not talking to me in Texas. He's not talking to anybody in New York. He's not talking to anybody in Florida. He is talking to Georgians. And I don't know whether or not Jon Ossoff is. And that's what I would point to with all these other examples that you said. You know, the people that are running against Mitch McConnell and Marjorie Taylor Greene and all that. You can run a campaign to raise money and get attention, or you can run a campaign to win. And I think when you're looking at these localities, I don't see a lot of, I see a lot of national talk. And that, this finished fight, like I mentioned. One of the quotes at the very end is a Democratic consultant that says, we were running a campaign for Politico and Axios. We weren't running a campaign for Michigan about the Harris campaign. And I think that's an endemic problem with the Democrats right now, is that everything has to be national and there's not a carve out for, no, you want to know what? Raphael Warnock ran a great campaign in Georgia because he was a totally nonpartisan person that was there for small business and education. That's how a Democrat wins in Georgia. I don't know if a Democrat wins in Georgia by talking about, well, Donald Trump's really an elite. It's like, what does that mean?
I think that platform could win if it's anyone else but Brian Kemp, though. That's the thing. Like if it's, God forbid, it's hard. If God forbid for the Republicans,
then Brian Kemp, then he has an incumbency advantage in that state. Right. That, there's one person that can beat his incumbency advantage, and that's Brian Kemp, the two-term governor.
Right. And I don't necessarily think that running that level of a nationalized campaign there is going to be the most effective winning strategy. It's definitely going to help him raise a lot of money. And unlike these
the
House
GDP
races,
of Poland, he is going to raise. Oh my God,
it's going to be insane. People forget that his House special election race was the most expensive one in history. That was just a House special election during
talk about stories we were talking about 8 years ago. It was the birth of Jon Ossoff. Yeah.
It was the special elections down there. And he will probably raise the GDP of a small nation here, in part because of that nationalized messaging here. If depending on what's going on at Blue, which is kind of the bigger story going on in the background here about their legal troubles on the conduit fundraising level. But I really do think that he is in a good position right now, as long as Kemp stays on the sideline. But as soon as Kemp jumps in, he's going to be in a lot of trouble. And I think Democrats are looking for that sort of standard bearer right now, not just in Georgia, but around the country. Could that be Jon Ossoff? Maybe, but then he goes down the same path that Beto O'Rourke did, where he was the flavor of the month for a little bit there, but then quickly kind of purged out of the larger party system when he felt like he was talking to that national audience too much and not to any one audience at all. When you're talking to everybody, you're talking to nobody.
Well, also, Beto ran a very well-funded campaign. He was a charismatic candidate that had, I think, mechanical campaign problems as he got closer to the finish line. He wasn't able to really position himself as a moderate, which is what he needed to do at the time. but he was running against somebody who is net negative popular compared to other Republicans in Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz is not a particularly popular Republican in Texas. He's popular in certain segments, but he has always run behind Cornyn. He's always run behind Abbott. Kemp's the gold standard. And, you know, there's somebody I follow on Twitter who's an elections person. I believe he writes for Split Ticket, Lakeisha Jane, who is great. Very much enjoy him. I enjoy his writing. He writes, people forget that Ossoff's good at this. He made Perdue a pariah after he beat him in 2020. Mm-hmm. Set aside how weird that election was and the fact that Ossoff was on the coattails of the Biden administration with Warnock, who was running ahead of them as well.
Set the Stacey Abrams turnout operation and everything.
Set aside that Perdue got COVID during the runoff and couldn't actually campaign. Set all that aside. He's not why Perdue is a pariah. Purdue's a pariah because he tried to run against Kemp. And Kemp heat rate him by 30 points in the primary, made it an absolute laugher with Trump's backing. Perdue humiliated himself, and that's why he's a pariah. So you can't say, John Ossoff, such a strong candidate. Look at what he did to Perdue. No, Kemp did that to Perdue, and he's going to be running against Kemp. So, we'll have plenty of time to talk about Georgia. Let's talk about Act Blue for now, because I do think if we're going to be looking for stories that we're going to be talking about in 6 months, Act Blue might be. We talked about this a little bit on the show a few weeks ago. From your perspective, what is smoke? What are you looking for when it comes to possible fire with Act Blue? And from your perspective, what do you think the fallout could be?
Well, let's just table set here that Act Blue is probably the most important electoral advantage that Democrats have over Republicans right now. It's not the map. It's not necessarily the candidate quality. It's not necessarily the figures within the party. It's the infrastructure that Act Blue has. It's been almost 20 years since it first launched in 2004, and Democrats have been able to tap into a nationwide fundraising apparatus of small dollar donors that has completely dominated Republicans in every election cycle. They are able to outraise and outspend Republicans across the map.
No matter enthusiasm. Like you can have a inert candidate that nobody can connect with on the Democratic side. You can have a wildly grassroots popular candidate on the Republican side. Doesn't matter. The Democrats are going to raise more. And the idea had always been it's a better mousetrap. They've been doing it for longer. Data scientists, push alerts, all of that.
No, it's an incredible infrastructure that Republicans have not been able to match, even with their own platform, Win Red. You know, Trump aside, who is kind of like the sun through which all other GOP planets orbit around in terms of small dollar fundraising. He's its own animal, its own solar system. Act Blue is incredibly important to Democrats. And when that story first broke about some of the turmoil there with folks leaving the leadership positions, problems even like on the digital and mechanical side as well.
People talking about whistleblower protections, like
and just this cloud of uncertainty and scandal hanging over it. I had Democratic strategists and some candidates reach out to me wondering what I had heard, because they've been hearing rumblings about this for a little bit, and they're very concerned about it, because unlike the Republicans, where there are a few other budding alternatives, Act Blue is the end-all, be-all there. If that is on the fritz, brother, watch out, because Democrats are going to be in a whole heap of trouble right now. Not just individual candidates, but party committees, PACs. All of this is going to be at risk.
Everything goes through Act Blue on the Democratic side. Unions go through Act Blue, the PACs go through Act Blue, the nonprofits go through Act Blue, the candidates go through Act Blue. Everything goes, because the idea had always been the more data you have, the more you know who would donate to anybody. That means that you can market other people and other causes to them. You can expand that social graph as wide as possible, and you can target more effectively. What we don't know is if we're going to assume, right, we're now into assumption land.
Right.
We know that there have been charges, usually from partisan sources, about Act Blue for a while, that they are not stringent on who is donating, that there have been allegations of straw donations from people that did not know that they were donating to Act Blue. Some of this has been presented with more compelling evidence than others, but we don't know if that's the case. We don't know if it's something else. I guess the consequence would be if Act Blue for at any time is either shuttered or reorganized, then there's going to be a meaningful blip in fundraising potential.
Absolutely. That's what everyone's wetting the bed over right now. And it's not just this internal cloud that we've seen slowly trickle out. It's Trump and his allies are also targeting it, to your point. Elon Musk is just openly musing on Twitter about how something's rotten in Act Blue. And you can't underestimate his impact of sicking his Twitter followers, his his online sleuths onto them right now. And again, Musk as well is playing pretty heavily in this Wisconsin Supreme Court race that's coming up next week.
Talk about the GDP of a NATO nation that is being poured into Wisconsin right now.
It is the most expensive judicial race in history. Broke the record from last year's judicial race up in Wisconsin. And Musk and his connected groups have spent $13 million on a single state Supreme Court race. If the Democrats have any sort of disruption with Act Blue, Musk has already vowed that he is going to get involved in primaries, that he's going to get involved in the general election as well next year. You can bet that fundraising disadvantage that Republicans would have in a normal year, Musk might be writing checks to help boost up those Republicans who are defending him, defending Doge, defending the administration. And if Democrats can't play in that same space because they just don't have the money, whether it's through a disruption at Act Blue, whether it's Musk just floods the zone here, they're in a whole heap of trouble right now.
Let's get into reckless speculation here.
You want to put, like you and I are both Bill Simmons guys. You want to put on conspiracy Bill hats?
Conspiracy, conspiracy, Kirk, conspiracy gerbs. What is true? Like, what do we think? Let's go 6 months in the future. The headlines on the Act Blue stuff. If even just to assume, all right, let's say Act Blue's reformed. Act Blue has a bunch of heat put on it. New leadership. The new leadership says, "Hey, old leadership." Made some mistakes. Here's what we're going to do differently. What are we looking at in terms of the mistakes that are admitted to?
Let's first off say on the front end, let's be responsible journalists here that spokespeople for Act Blue have denied any sort of wrongdoing right now, have denied any sort of malfeasance, et cetera, et cetera. I do feel like that at the minimum right now, the lowest bar to cross for this type of conspiracy and this type of controversy that we're seeing is skirting of financial disclosure laws. This is something that trips up every sort of candidate here. There's always some sort of, especially when you're dealing with that much money and you're dealing with this widespread, again, it's national, in some cases international, when you think about like the fundraising that Democrats abroad do, or even some other interested parties who might be using individuals or groups to conduit money through Act Blue, through straw dollar donors. It's probably going to be something like that, where it's the reporting, where it's people are given money who they don't think they say they are. And because the FEC has just been so hamstrung
non-existent
over the last, let's be honest here, decade and a half or so, if not longer. I mean, they're a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest on the best days. And this is a giant infrastructure here that is so difficult to get your hands around. It would be hard for me to believe that there's not some sort of mismanagement of the reporting of who is donating to whom, or if who they say they are on their little digital return form is actually who it is. Now, I don't think that like an MSNBC mom somewhere donating to Jamie Harrison when he was running for Senate in South Carolina is committing massive election fraud or massive finance fraud. But I do think that there might be more crimes of negligence here than crimes of intent, if that makes sense.
I don't know if I would go so far as to say that anybody intentionally said we need to let foreign donors wood chipper billions of dollars into the American election system. It would not shock me if people at Act Blue saw red flags that some of that stuff was happening and said, number go up. I don't want to know why a bunch of Home Depot gift cards got renewed on our site over the last 6 months. I just know that a bunch of money has come in. That's a lot of 3% for Act Blue. That's, it doesn't help us with our social graph, but money is money is money. And that's what actually makes the world go round. And so they are happy to see that. What I wonder is who's going to be left holding the bag. And when that happens, who replaces it and whether or not Act Blue survives. That's really what I'm curious about. I don't know whether or not this is just going to be something that me and you care about, because there are some reforms and somebody new comes in and they pledge to clean things up, but it's so arcane that nobody really pays attention to it, and largely the band plays on, if maybe with a slightly less of a gigantic ratio of small dollar donations between Republicans and Democrats, or if it's like gigantic scandal. And that's where the Elon does come into it. If there's anything juicy here, the Republicans are in a position now, media-wise, where they can make something a lot louder than they could have 10 years ago.
And look, they might not be passing a lot of legislation right now in Congress, but you bet your ass they can haul someone into an oversight hearing. You can bet that they're going to put as much pressure on them that the administration's doing to these other big law firms right now as well. The FBI has said it's going to look into AdBlue. Ted Cruz has called for more investigations into AdBlue as well. They are going to use the full force of the federal government, if they can, to find any sort of cracks. So look, we're trying to decide the difference here between smoke and fire right now. Well, the Trump administration is going to be in every nook and cranny right now trying to find any sort of kindling right now to see if they can burn that place down. And the biggest thing here is that there's no alternative. There's no alternative. There's no second platform here. So if this is under any sort of duress at all, Democrats are in a whole lot of trouble.
Because it's not, they can't just spin up something else. Like, it will take another cycle for them to do anything that had the equivalent fire hose. Yeah.
At least another cycle. I mean, you want to see how hard it is to build the ship build the plane while you're trying to fly it. Look at all the trouble WinRed had when it first launched after 2017. Like, it's going to take a very long time to establish the same type of data collection, the same type of ubiquity that AdBlue did. I mean, it's just ingrained in every sort of Democratic campaign apparatus, from city council, if that's a partisan one, to all the way up to president here. You cannot replicate that in a few months.
And again, this is what Democrats look at as a tremendous strength, and Republicans have always looked at askance, is that the Democrat outraises the Republican everywhere because of Act Blue with small dollar donations. Biden outraised Trump on small dollar donations. Kamala outraised Trump with small dollar donations. All of the Senate campaigns, win or lose, outraised their Republican counterparts on small dollar donations. Everything in the House, like, it is from president to dog catcher. If you have a D next to your name, you raise more in small dollar donations, even when there is clearly not the same populist connection between the various different candidates. It is just a stated fact.
And it affects strategy as well. That's why Steve Daines, the chairman of the NRSC, went out of his way last cycle to recruit wealthy businessmen to make up that gap. Because, look, Republicans have tried to make up that gap in small dollar donors. They can't do that, especially with Trump sucking in a lot of the attention. So why don't we just recruit a lot of people who are independently wealthy so they can self-finance these campaigns? Exactly.
And then they will grumble and say, but wait a minute, hold on. Like, why are we not getting closer? Why are we not, like, why is there always a gigantic gap? And that's where you get, if we're on Mars, if we're on crazy, if it turns out that we are living in Alex Jones's personal, like, fantasy delusion, then it's something like, okay, they can prove that USAID money went into, was wood chippered into Act Blue at some point or something like that. Like, that's where you get into the more extreme partisan, theory crafting for stuff.
Look, we're saying that's extreme now, but think about what's happened a month ago when Musk is going around saying USAID is underwriting Politico and all these other media organizations because they bought subscriptions. That's not going to be that big of a leap if they start getting some sort of data that shows all these folks who said their job description was federal employee or government contractor or lobbyist or something like that. If they look at that and say, oh, look how much money these groups have given to ActBlue. They're funneling money through there. And that's where it gets really messy between what is real and what's not. But that's not really going to matter if the pressure is there that causes any sort of disruption to service or any sort of problem with the platform itself.
All right, last thing here before I get you out of here. Somebody sent me an overheard in DC tweet this morning, Monday morning, saying from the Navy Yards, why is everybody here? They walks into a restaurant in the morning. It's like, oh, well, they all got laid off. Nobody has a job anymore. Has DC entered its day drinking season?
If you look at the crowds at Union Market, I'm here in my neck of the woods. Yes, it is. It really has become pretty bleak up here. I know the last time we were on here, we were talking about the mood in town. Yeah. It is pretty rough out here. I think everyone knows someone who has lost their job connected to the federal government somehow. And while this has been awful news for them personally, it's been a big boon for DC area happy hours. I know a few that have actually moved. They've moved up their times to earlier in the afternoon. I didn't think that was possible here, but people are just kind of stunned walking around here trying to figure out what to do next. And misery does love company. As you know, we're two guys in the media industry. Sure. We know how tough it can be out there. You and I have probably been to our fair share of journalism happy hours for someone losing a job, and it's been a big boon to the happy hour market here in town.
So this is for real kind of changed the mood of the city then.
It absolutely has. And, this usually happens anytime there's a change in administration, change in control of Congress. People are shuffling in and out. But it's not just in the political space now. Now it's in the career space as well. You used to see all that turnover in Navy Yard. You would see that turnover in Columbia Heights, one of those areas where the new arrivals come in and they rotate people in and out. But now it's affecting places in the suburbs where people have settled down to start families up in Bethesda, Silver Spring, Arlington, Alexandria. It's really kind of a region-wide malaise right now with how many people are losing work.
That'd be interesting to see the like the Zillow data on whether or not there's been more houses listed in some of those suburban areas compared to other years.
I'd be really interested in like unemployment claims as well by zip code here. I just know from personal experience here, I'm looking to move apartments in Capitol Hill here later this summer, and just peeking on Zillow right now, and it is incredible to see how many houses are for sale, how many are slashing the rent here, because people are just cycling out a lot quicker right now, and they're not necessarily having people coming in to replace them.
I mean, that would be. Talk about a real, something that we'll talk about not only in 6 months, but we might be talking about it in 6 years, is this kind of reduction in federal workforce, which is like, I think this has kind of gotten lost in the shuffle with all the adrenaline. My entire life, there have been conservatives that are talked about reducing the headcount of the federal government, and the excuse, now we can think of it as an excuse, but the conversation around it has always been, it's a lot harder. It's almost impossible to fire a federal worker.
Right.
I don't know, man. It seems like
they're making it look pretty easy.
Making it look easy. Just two scooping employees and throwing them over the Potomac.
It's they're making it look so easy right now. And again, there's a lot of legal cases working through this right now.
Speaking of people that I've known, I know somebody that lost their job and now they've been given their job back, and they already found another gig, but they technically have their old job back while they are waiting to see if they can get paid to resign it.
No, I have friends who lost their job, and 3 days later they get a call or message like, hey, can you actually come in? We really need your help with something, and we'll give you like some contractor status or something like that. It's just, it's very confusing right now too. It's kind of just very shock and awe, and I think that's why you've seen some of the other regional leaders a little bit slower to respond. I feel like Wes Moore, the governor of Maryland, has been trying to jump in on this early. Glenn Youngkin is touting unemployment resources because the whole economy of Northern Virginia is based off the federal government. But you've seen Abigail Spanberger, the Democrat, running to replace.
She's running on it. That's her number one issue for governor.
Huge issue in the campaign is running against these cuts to federal employees, because again, that is the base of the
certainly for the Democrats
regional economy. Absolutely. And so you see her leaning into that. Again, we started this conversation trying to figure out what are we going to be talking about in 6 months here. And I think as these court cases about these mass layoffs and firing keep working through, as the unemployment benefits start running out, and there's a lot of people looking for work, not just in the D.C. area, but think about outside in Kansas City as well, which has a huge federal workforce. Chicago as well. It's not just here in the swamp where I'm living, but all across the country. If they're facing these cuts to the federal workforce, that's going to be a big ongoing story, and a slow moving one at that.
And meanwhile, some busy happy hours. Early busy happy hours in DC, especially as the weather continues to warm up, right?
Exactly. If I'm not here at the water date, I'm down at the waterfront over at Nick's right now.
There we go. All right. As always, a pleasure to chat with Mr. Kirk Bado. Where can people find you?
Justin, always great to be here with you and your audience here. I'm over on Twitter at Kirk Bado. Our hotline stuff is also over there at NJ Hotline, and I've been neglecting it for a little bit, but I am on Substack now, trying to do a semi-regular newsletter.
Hey,
you've Substack pilled me, and I'm trying to. I'm just trying to get my stuff that's on all these different platforms in one place here. So I'm on Substack at Kirk Bado as well. And so thanks for having me, Justin. Always love talking shop with you.
Love to see it. See you later, man.
See you, brother.
This is your update, brought to you by TakePoliticsSeriously.com. Join the team, man. Get 2 bonus episodes each and every week at TakePoliticsSeriously.com. $3 a week, man. Price of a cup of coffee. Build $12 a month. Or if you really just want to set it and forget it, hit me off with the annual plan. Less than $100, $99, and you get 150 plus episodes of the show. Less than $1 an episode. Come on, man. What are you doing? Stay on top of your political world by heading on over to TakePoliticsSeriously.com. Now let's get to some stories that we didn't have a chance to talk to. We brushed over this, but we didn't get into the details, so let's do that now. Congressional Republicans have returned to Washington optimistic after their spending victory, but now face stalled progress on President Trump's top legislative priority, a complex budget combining tax, energy, defense, and broader policies. House and Senate Republicans remain at odds, trading blame and waiting on each other's decisions, creating a legislative standoff. Key disagreements include deep cuts to social programs, Medicaid, and contentious tax breaks like the SALT deductions. House Speaker Mike Johnson's ambitious April timeline appears unrealistic to some, although John Thune said today that a combined bill would be discussed and on the floor by April 7th. That is 1 week before the Easter recess. As we talked about with Kirk, there's only one real thing that kind of matters that we're going to really talk about in 6 months, and that is what happens with the big, beautiful bill. Anything that's in it that can be attacked by Democrats are going to be the message when it comes to the midterms. Anything that Republicans believe that they can run on will be in it too. So we are going to essentially set the agenda based on what actually makes it in this bill, what makes it through the bird bath, what makes it through the parliamentarian. We're going through it again. Anybody who was with the show during Build Back Better knows that this is where I sit like Jack Torrance in the Overlook Hotel and slowly try to not go crazy. Because I hate this part, but whatever. God bless Jen Briney. She watches these Congress people constantly. And you don't even get to talk about ads or elections. The White House announced on Tuesday separate agreements with Russia and Ukraine, ensuring safe navigation in the Black Sea, potentially paving the way for peace talks. Technical negotiations facilitated by the U.S. secured commitments to proven military use of commercial vessels and improving Russia's agricultural export access. Moscow conditioned implementation on U.S. sanctions relief, a detail that D.C. did not mention when they did their readout. Notable. Ukrainian President Zelensky expressed cautious optimism. The deal addresses critical shipping disruptions affecting global grain and fertilizer supplies, following the collapse of the earlier Black Sea Grain Initiative. Successful implementation could ease global food security concerns heightened by the ongoing conflict. One more step forward on a Ukraine-Russia peace deal, and what we have told you from the very beginning is occurring. Ukraine has nothing they can give Russia. One might say contentiously, they don't have the cards. The cards that can get Russia to do things are the U.S. cards. And that is us saying that we will begin to ease sanctions and allow Russia to be part of the global economic marketplace again. Now, that is directly in opposition to where the State Department wanted things under the Biden administration. They very much wanted Russia's economy to collapse because they wanted to stabilize Russian leadership. But, the question is, how long do you have to go before you get to that? And so the Trump administration sees it differently. They would rather throw an economic lifeline to Russia and end the current situation than see it go on. That's where we are. One final thing, and Will, do me a favor, throw this graphic up, the direction of the country averaged out from Real Clear Politics. This is something that made the rounds a little bit on social media today. Harry Enton of CNN talked about it. And I just wanted to bring it up because Donald Trump's approval sits somewhere on the aggregate around 47 and change. His disapproval sits around 49 and change. I'm going to lump that in together. I don't want to get too into the decimals about it and just say we're in a 50-50 country. Nothing has really changed to me of how we should think about Donald Trump's popularity compared to the election, because he won by like 51% or 49, right? 49 point, right? And so this is essentially that in the average, right? If you're going to say margin of error. What is interesting is the fact that the direction of the country has spiked up. So there are more people who believe that the changes being made by Donald Trump are better for the country than existed before. Now, we'll throw that logo or throw that graphic up one more time. You might notice another little hump that happened a few years ago. That was right after Biden got elected. Right now, the RCP average is right track 43.1, wrong track 50.9. That is as high as it gets over the last 3 years. The highest that Biden got in the Real Clear Politics average was 43.8. That happened on April 20th, 2021. Burn one. Will Trump get higher than Biden by 420 when it comes to right track, wrong track? That is something we will have to see. Is that the height of how much you can swing the polarized independents in America? I don't know. We're going to find out. But however optimistic you felt, if you did feel optimistic when Joe Biden got elected, essentially, we are within a percentage point of that same level of optimism existing throughout the country. Now, I would imagine that not a lot of the same people are excited, but roughly the same amount of people are excited. And so as we go through the calculations of how much do you run against Trump? How much do you run next to Trump? How much do you run against the changes that Trump has made? How much do you run for the changes that Trump has made? These are the kind of things that you got to think about when you're creating that calculus. So I wanted to put that on your radar. I also wanted to put on your radar that you can support this show by heading on over to TakePoliticsSeriously.com. Sign up at a monthly level. That is $3 a week, build 12 a month, or you can knock it out with a set it and forget it price of under $100, $99. Cheapest way that you can get the show. You get 2 bonus episodes for your money. And we love to do it. Anyway, let's go ahead and get to the debuting Matthew Frank of The Ankler. I would like to welcome to the program reporter for The Ankler, Matthew Frank, to the show. How you doing, Matthew?
I'm doing good, Justin. Thank you for having me.
So one of the big stories that I have been very, very keen to follow since everything that happened last summer with Joe Biden is the fundraising mechanisms that exist within the Democratic ecosystem. And I just read, and next week we're going to have on the authors of the new book Fight, Amy Parnes and Jonathan Allen. And in that book, they discuss in pretty intricate detail the pillars of money fountains that, or the money fountains that the Democrats drink from. And primarily you're looking at 3 of them. There's the Bay Area money, the Silicon Valley money, the LA money, and the Wall Street money. And you just wrote a piece for The Ankler, giving, at least from my point of view, the first little check-in on at least the LA side. So before we get into what's happening, describe for the listeners, when we talk about the LA donor structure, what are we talking about? How much money, and who are the bold-faced names, as it were, that are involved?
Yeah, so a lot of the money that comes from LA, as you mentioned, goes to the Democratic Party. It's a super, super huge fundraising base for the Democrats. And the 3 huge industries in California or in LA are agriculture, tech, and Hollywood and entertainment. Mm-hmm. And entertainment is this traditionally known as, quote unquote, the ATM for the Democrats. That's been the pet name for them over the years, just because they are so willing to donate to just about any Democratic cause. And that's not a surprise. Hollywood is overwhelmingly liberal. But there's a lot of bold-faced names, to your point, that donate, excess amounts of money or are continually donating at the cap. And it's all kind of the big names that you would associate with Hollywood. It's a lot of like Steven Spielberg and J.J. Abrams and, Jeffrey Katzenberg and all these big major names in the Hollywood ecosystem are all these major Hollywood donors. And so it really is a huge fundraising source for the Democrats. And if you look at any campaign that Democrats run, whether it's in the primaries, even if it's, for a congressional seat in Maryland or somewhere else, a lot of the time they're coming to LA for fundraising visits, and they are going to the house of some big producer and throwing some giant fundraiser where it's all, $20,000 a seat or, something maybe not in that ballpark unless you're talking presidential, but, even for like Hakeem Jeffries came down last week and it was $10,000 to get in. It was $100,000 to be an event share. So this is somewhere where the Democrats, put a lot of eggs in this basket, if you will.
So we're talking millions, if not billions of dollars when you tally everything up over the course of a year.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, if you look at, Kamala Harris raised over $1 billion in the last cycle, and a lot of that money came from Hollywood. I mean, Hollywood, in 2020 when she ran for the nomination, even though she, got resoundingly defeated, she had the most amount of donors from Hollywood. So she was like a hometown candidate. She was
because she lives in LA. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. She lives in Brentwood. It's like she is a part of the community. She was the first, I believe it was the first Democratic candidate for president ever from California. And I think the most Western ever, like the closest was George McGovern in like 72. So
closest on the Democratic
yeah.
side. Yeah. Yeah. Because
Yeah,
otherwise you'd
yeah.
be looking at like Reagan and Nixon in terms of
Exactly.
presidential candidates from California.
Yeah.
But all that changed in that weird hot summer we had last year where Joe Biden goes out on television, his brain leaks through his nose, everybody freaks out, and Hollywood was no stranger to that. Where are we now? You write that it doesn't, the fact that the election ended didn't mean that the money immediately turned back on. There still is a lot of hesitation in Hollywood.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a number of factors, right? One is, to your point, Joe Biden. There's this guy, Jeffrey Katzenberg, who I mentioned before. He ran DreamWorks. He was this huge figure, and he's been known as the, scion of the Democratic Hollywood donor class, really like canvassing donations, getting people to
he was Biden's
join the fight.
Biden's LA chair, right? Biden 24's LA chair.
He was one of the campaign co-chairs. I don't know if he was the only one from LA, but he was one of them. And then eventually he became it for Harris. But when he was doing it for Biden, he was telling people he's fine. Don't worry about the age. Even when
everything's fine.
People were sounding the alarms. Come see him. Come see him for yourself. He's great. He looks wonderful. And then, to your point, his brain bled out of his nose, or whatever you want to call it. And people were very angry with him. People were very angry with the Democrats. And then that was the first sin, if you will. And then from there, there was a nomination process. Even though, people in Hollywood love Kamala Harris, she is a hometown candidate, all that. There are donors now who, hindsight's 2020, but they're now saying, oh, well, we knew there should have been a nomination process. We knew there should have been this and that and an open convention.
Well, they also
or whatever
know
you
her
want
best. This is not somebody that is going to come out and just be this glittering thing that whatever they wanted to be. And obviously there was a lot of adrenaline that came along with deposing a president who was running for re-election. But I think, it wasn't anything that was it was a total secret that some people wanted a mini primary. They wanted a big fight at the convention. They wanted somebody other than her, but still she comes in, she gets all the money that was pulled back from Biden comes to Kamala and then some. But you're saying that now the LA donors are still kind of just feeling burnt by the entire process.
Yeah, well, a lot of them are like, well, I saw it in advance. I knew that this was a terrible idea to have her, just assume the nomination. I mean, it's a lot of hindsight. And again, in the moment, it all kind of made sense, right? Where it was like, oh, Biden's the incumbent. How are you going to, that in theory is the best odds. And then, oh, this is the vice president. This is the natural next step. But of course, now it all looks pretty bad. And also the fact that, of course, they raised a lot of money from Hollywood. They raised a lot of money from everywhere. They had, over $1 billion. And that all seemingly went to waste, if you will. I mean, they're still getting back, their debts. I mean, donors sent over emails of like, Barack Obama sending out an email with the subject line "hope," and it's trying to like get back money for the Harris Victory Fund, and it's March, so it's a feeling of, what did you do with our money? You don't really know how to win.
Yeah. So they are. That was the other thing that I was kind of curious about, is that beyond the fact that all the money showed up and she didn't win, there is this lingering feeling in the air, which is rare in politics, which is like, wait a minute, what did you do? Where did that money go? So you start to hear some of these stories that come out of, well, they spent $100,000 to build the Call Her Daddy set in a hotel instead of flying Kamala to LA. Like there was just a lot of these things that have kind of added up. And in my experience in watching these kinds of stories in the past, normally those don't happen. Everybody understands, look, it's a contact sport. You got to give a lot of money. Everybody gets paid. That's that. Rarely, especially on the Democratic side, do you see anybody start saying, wait a minute, show me the budget, show me who got paid what. But now it sounds like some of the Brentwood donors are feeling almost doge-ish in terms of wondering where the money went.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah. They're feeling a little bit on that side of it, where it's like, and it's also, everyone's in their, siloed little, echo chamber of LA, where it's, of course we're going to win. Trump can't win again. This can't happen.
Yeah.
All this stuff. And, we have all this money. And how do you blow it, if you like, how does that happen? Where it's not only you don't win, there are like losses. You lost in a lot of you lost a lot of ground in regions that you had once had supported, and so
including California.
Including California, right? Yeah, it's this question of like, how does this happen, and like taking stock, because again, this is it's one thing if Trump wins once, it's another thing if he wins again, and it's like, like how do you let this happen? And it's a lot of donors, and across the Democratic, constituency, but particularly in Hollywood, who are saying, like, what do we need to change here? What has to be different, because I can't just be blindly giving you money unless you're giving me something concrete in the sense of, okay, this is what you're doing this time that is different from what you're doing last time.
This is what fascinated me about your report, because donors being mad at a political establishment that just lost, tale as old as time. That happens. Them telling people, well, I'm not going to give you enough money. I'm not going to give you the same money because I feel burnt by this. That happens every once in a while if somebody feels really kind of upset about it, but you hear about it through secondhand sources down the road. It's rare when it comes to good reporters like you who are like, look, I've talked to a bunch of people and they're like, I'm mad. I don't know if I can trust you with my money. And it's going to take some convincing for me to get off the sidelines for the midterms. That means that there is a deeper rot here with not only the relationship between the donors and the party, but also just LA in general. What does LA want? And let me ask you this. It does appear that, especially after the fire and the fact that Gavin Newsom is coming to the end of his term, he is now pivoting in ways that some people in LA might find uncomfortable to a more centrist role. The Democratic brand in California, just in general, feels like it's in flux, like it is not the cohesive machine that it was 5 years ago. From your perspective, would that be correct?
I think that's really accurate. Yeah. I mean, again, it's this feeling of across the party of like, it's rudderless. There's no, leader. There's no direction. There's no, this is the path. Like, to your point, I mean, Newsom has taken on this very centrist, very, I'm going to do podcasts with right wingers, and people in Hollywood are unabashedly anti him putting, Charlie Kirk and Steve Bannon and whoever else on a podcast. Yeah. But they're also still looking for that, like, all right, like, what else can we do here? And yeah, I mean, it's a party that, look, I mean, a lot of Hollywood has been, overrun by, quote unquote, like digital media and all this stuff that has, in a lot of ways, come from the Democratic Party. And so, that Republicans have, utilized better. And so it's a lot of, Hollywood Democrats on the sidelines being like, well, you guys should adapt, the way we can't. You have to, kind of change your tune. But yeah.
It's funny you mentioned that, because it does make sense also because Hollywood's changing. We're at a point now where the power players of Hollywood are beginning to be subsumed, and the studios aren't what they used to be. The networks aren't what they used to be. Everything is becoming a tile on one of 3 or 4 different streaming services that are largely operated either in Silicon Valley or New York. If you look at where a lot of the power players are, I mean, like really the homegrown Southern California streaming service is Netflix, and they are probably the least likely to just buy something and allow a little fiefdom inside of it to exist, which is what Hollywood thrives on. So maybe this is just the outgrowth of a lot of instability, that the industry, the boomtown industry, is now in flux. You've got a shaken element of leadership with local California Democratic leadership, including Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass, who has taken a lot of justifiable flack since the fires. And then one of the most spectacularly high fundraising but low results general elections in recent history. So when you put all that together, it makes all the sense in the world that somebody wouldn't be wanting to stroke a $20,000 check for somebody that they don't know on faith.
Exactly, right. And part of it is that, and then part of it, to your point, with the industry in flux, there's not 30 Jeffrey Katzenbergs, there's not 30 Steven Spielbergs. No. There are less people with that kind of blank check money, if you will, and it is tough for the Democratic Party because just in terms of a pure volume perspective, I mean, they come here, they ask for, pay $100,000 to be an event chair. And it's like people, not necessarily, there are less people with that money. And then another factor too, that you might have mentioned is the wildfires, which, didn't affect everyone. And the people with blank checks, they'll still have blank checks, but like for a region that, is giving a lot to charity right now, and has, a lot of pressing needs, the Democratic Party, which, again, what are you doing? Like, it's not only is, I mean, for a time they weren't asking donors for money, but in California or in Hollywood, that is. But now it becomes something very difficult where it's all these factors just piled on together that, again, we're still a year and a half out roughly from the midterms. So a lot of time to go. And a lot of donors said, look, it's all donors are uniformly, horrified by Trump. Like they're all, they're like, it's easy for me to dunk on Democrats. That's, I can do that all day long. But like, when it comes, time, I would hope that the Democrats can have their things, their everything together so they can do it. But again, it's looking for those signs of a leader for anyone, within the party to kind of step up. Because again, like Kamala Harris, captured a lot of people's eye. Obama in '08 was a huge, surge for the community. And there's nobody now who feels, like a lot of people quoted to me James Carville, who said like, we have a lot of talent in the party, which, and the donors are saying like, all right, like show me, like, bring them. Let's see.
Go. Bring them on down. Yeah. Bring them on down. We'll hit the pool. It'll be a good time. And just dazzle me a little bit. Give me a little Wes Moore. Give me a little Gretchen Whitmer. Show me around. Show me the wares.
Not Chuck Schumer in swim shorts. Let's not do that. Let's have it.
Well, certainly keep him away from the grill. Jeez Louise. That guy has no idea what the hell he's doing. Yeah, it's what I read your piece as was somebody please listen to us. Like this was a cry for help that somebody should pay attention. And where I wonder about going forward is, there's no center of gravity in this party anymore. And part of the reason that Joe Biden got run out was because you had Ari Emanuel coming out and saying, I'm done giving. I'm telling all my friends not to give anymore, which of course is added hilarity because he's the inspiration for Ari from Entourage. So the real Ari from Entourage coming out and acting like Ari from Entourage to get a president kicked out is its own level of entertainment. But still, it's like the donor class, and especially in LA where, George Clooney comes out and sticks the knife in between the ribs of Biden publicly. Like that was a big part of the reason why that happened. So in some instances, I bet you there's people certainly within the Biden camp and in the Democratic Party writ large saying, look, we gave you what you wanted. You wanted Kamala. We gave you Kamala.
Right.
This is your choice. And that's the problem right now in the Democratic Party is there's a lot of people doing the Spider-Man meme saying, no, this is what you wanted. And there's no adult in the room to say, guys, calm down. We're going to focus on these people and these issues. We're going to take back the House in the midterms. We're going to do the best we can in the Senate. And then we're going to have a big primary that goes forward and you can pick your challenger there. Everybody is running around with the chicken, like a chicken with their head cut off. And the donors, usually they're supposed to be doing that, but now they're saying, hey, somebody calm us down, and no one's there to do it.
Yeah, no, exactly. And like, I mean, Clooney, Ari Emanuel, like Hollywood has a big voice within the party. I mean, they're known as like the, quote unquote PR arm of it, but like they do, also like, I mean, the Clooney thing was a huge deal when that happened. And that like
huge
was a huge thing. He was like, I saw him backstage. He was not, up to the task. All these things where, the party not only relies on the Democrats, the party not only relies on Hollywood, it also relies on them for, is dependent on them for, okay, we trust you guys, which is a hard thing for, there is a sort of dissonance there because, a lot of people in the Democratic Party don't take Hollywood seriously because, one strategist said to me, like, like we'll fundraise there, but they're not exactly, the sharpest tools in the shed. I mean, they make, for all intents and purposes, like, that's not how he put it, but, they make movies. Like, this is not a place that, like, has really detailed thoughts on the Middle East. So it's like, How do you, balance that? Because Silicon Valley, right? They, say what you will about that. They've changed their tune in a lot of ways, but it's like they have been consistent on like, we want deregulation in these areas, we want this, we want that, and they have a lot of these like asks. And Hollywood is not really taken seriously by a lot of Democrats in the party because they don't really ask for anything. It's just come here, pitch your vision, and it's the Futurama, like sold. Like you're good. So it's hard for I talked to one former a longtime studio executive who's like a lot of politicians would come and like they would fundraise and he would talk with them and they would go like, the one thing I don't understand is like, why don't you guys ask us for anything? There's no like asks, especially for, we talked about it a little bit earlier, but like the industry is in flux. Yeah. And, there's a lot of, there are things that Hollywood could ask for, piracy, control, AI regulation. But they're not really asking for any of that. I mean, I did a story about, how Congress is trying to like, regulate, piracy internationally. And the person leading the charge on that is this guy, Darrell Issa, who, nominated Donald Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. He's not getting a lot of Hollywood donations. Like Hollywood, could be, trying to stake its claim in certain places. And not only, would it help the industry, maybe it helps, them get taken seriously. So that way, there is more of a symbiotic, virtuous cycle in the donation stream. But for now, it's a lot of, because it goes back a while, like, all the way to the Malibu Mafia of like, people in Hollywood, like opposing the Vietnam War. Like it's, it is a community. Yeah. It's a community driven by its ideals, by its, this is what we believe. And, we don't care about ourselves. And, it's one of those things that as it evolves, it's, they'll just come out here and ask for money and it doesn't. Yeah, translate.
In this Beverly Hills house, we believe ... It's so funny when you said that they're looked down upon by the consultant class, largely based out of DC. It made me think of the old adage that DC is LA for ugly people, but I never really thought that it could go the opposite way. That LA is DC for dumb people.
That's exactly right. Yeah. LA is DC for dumb. Yeah, pretty much.
One of these things, I just read this book, and it was the fight book, and it brought something up that I noticed throughout this cycle, and I even had one of them on the show, which is the rise of kind of the money manager. That like a lot of these people, largely out of Silicon Valley, would hire. These are rich people would hire somebody that would do the research and make the decisions for the person's money. So we had Dimitri Melman on. He did it for Reid Hoffman. But the Biden camp, as everything was going awry, and they were looking for anybody to blame, they for a brief time started blaming these money managers. That the money managers were the real victim. In a bygone era, Biden could get on the phone call with 9 rich people and calm everybody down. Now it was much harder to do. Now they refused to admit that it was because, again, Biden looked like he drank from the wrong grail on television and slowly decomposed for millions of viewers. But is that something that is happening in Hollywood, where you do have this class of people that are managing the money, or is that mostly a Northern California thing, a Silicon Valley trend?
No, not at all. I mean, there are people who have spent, 20 years, 30 years, people that I talk to who, are these quote unquote, Hollywood donor advisors. These people who are saying, okay, what do you care about? Do you care about the environment? Okay, here are 3 candidates we can donate to. Here's 1 charity we can sponsor. Here's, this, that, and the other. There are people who specialize in that. And I mean, it's something that, in theory, that they are the, people at the center of control for the Democrats who, if they're trying to get to these donors, you get to those people, that's a huge victory because, the ones that I talk to, I mean, not a monolithic group, not monolithic, in the donor advisors, but, there were ones who said like the party is in complete flux. I don't trust them. I don't think that this is, the time to be asking for money. I don't think people are donating. And that just makes it incredibly difficult when, to your point, the gatekeepers are not, in support. And particularly when the messaging isn't strong enough to get to the donors themselves,
Yeah.
And it stays at those intermediaries.
Let me ask you one last question. I'll get you out of here. What is the name you hear the most often when you're having these conversations? Obviously, there's nobody that's going to blow anybody's socks off, but there's got to be a name that you've heard more than others in the world of Democratic politics that they like, or somebody that they wish would run, or they hope will run, or they think is a spark. What is that name?
That name is Stephen A. Smith. No. I kid, of course. I kid.
Oh my God, really? I would be so excited. I would be so thrilled if you were.
I wish I could come here and tell you it was Stephen A., but it's not, sadly. But don't let him get to the debates. He's dangerous if he gets to the debates. But
do you know that? I don't know if you brought this up. This was my whole thing. I was like, look, if you put Stephen A. Smith on a stage with 16 career politicians, he is going to be Donald Trump in Cleveland back in 2016. He is going to flamethrower all of them, and it won't be fair and it won't be nice, but he will absolutely be the center of attention.
Absolutely. If he can take Skip Bayless, he can take Andy Bashir, I think, pretty easily.
Exactly. Come on. You're telling me if he can talk over Shannon Sharp, he can talk over AOC.
Exactly. If he gets to the debates. But so it's not Stephen A. Nobody brought up Stephen A.
No. That'd be Wall Street anyway. That's not going to be LA.
Yeah. No, it's maybe Wall Street. But no, I mean, look, it is very early. But again, a lot of people, Kamala Harris might run for governor. That's someone who people are like, she would clear the field. People still love her.
Yes.
Mayorally, it's, kind of early, but there are some names floating around. For president, it is very early, but Chris Murphy was mentioned,
Chris Murphy, okay.
People still like Gavin Newsom. He is someone who is like, even if people were uniformly against the podcast, he is someone who, people think is a seasoned politician.
He has deep ties in LA.
He has deep ties. There's a lot of value to being a hometown candidate. I mean, again, it is early, but there are people catching Hollywood's eye, and this is a group that can be won over. They can fall in love pretty easily. So
sure.
There are candidates who, and again, I mean, Hakeem Jeffries is coming out here. People like Speaker Pelosi because Speaker Emerita Speaker Pelosi, because she would come out here and she would say, "This is how we're going to win." They would, she would take them, seriously, as opposed to maybe some other candidates who would come out here and kind of launch a lot of fluff at donors and say, I'm leading with, whatever, leading with love. It is something that, again, very early, but, people brought up Chris Murphy, people brought up an assortment of different names. There probably won't be anyone who, quite like in 2020 or obviously in 24 who runs the field like Kamala Harris. But again, early days, and it depends on who goes again. But
that's what I was curious to ask you that question, because I know there's nobody that's going to have like a real heartbeat, but I'm just curious who's showing up on the radar scatter there. But Chris Murphy's interesting. He's obviously trying really hard for it. He is very, very thirsty for that level of attention.
Yeah, I mean, he's one of the ones who is kind of adapting to that new media. He's doing TikToks. He's doing these videos where he's putting the camera in front of his face, and Hollywood enjoys people who are at least, making some effort at, trying to engage on the same playing field. Presentation, exactly. And that's something that Hollywood understands. And so trying to get on that same playing field that, the Republicans kind of, dominated in the last cycle. People like, people who are at least trying to do that, even if they don't like Newsom's podcast, people who are at least trying to do that, in earnest.
I mean, look, if Newsom can't raise a gigantic amount of money in LA, then he has a lot bigger problems than his podcast. That would be pretty crazy, considering the amount of money he's raised out of LA in the past.
It would be. Yeah. No, I mean, and he did not take much of the flack for the fires, even though, I mean, online, if you look on, X or wherever else, there were a lot of people
conservatives pin it on him because they hate him. Yeah.
Exactly. It was kind of one of those things where conservatives pinned it on Newsom and Bass, and a lot of the Democrats, pin it on Bass, or, still like Bass, but say, well, she's kind of a lame duck because of all that's, come her way.
Hard to come back from. I left LA to go to Africa, even though I knew that there was a gigantic chance that the city could light on fire. That's a hard one to come back from, no matter what.
It was not great optics. No, yeah,
that might be the most charitable way to say it. Bad optics. Bad optics. Good optics has been our new friend, Matthew Frank from The Ankler. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, people can find me on The Ankler, which is on Substack. So that is our publication. And churning out more stories about Hollywood and the intersection of Hollywood and politics and all sorts of fun stuff. So, yeah.
Well, I know I am now a subscriber to it. I very much look forward to reading more of your work. Thank you very much for coming on.
Cool. Thank you, Justin. Appreciate it.
And that'll wrap it up for us today. Politics is written and hosted by me, Justin Robert Young, for Dog and Pony Show Audio in Austin, Texas. We are edited by Will Saddleberg. I want to thank Kirk Bado of National Journal and Matthew Frank of The Ankler for joining us on the program. If you'd like to email the show, you can do so, theyoungamerican@gmail.com. If you'd like to write me about politics, or if you psychosomatically convince yourself that you're ill like I do. Similarly, you can support me, paypal.me/payjury. Venmo is Justin-Young-20. Cash App is PX3Cash, and you can send me anything you'd like in the mail. Post Office Box 1531-84, Austin, Texas 78715. The only place to support this show is TakePoliticsSeriously.com. Paying members get 2 bonus episodes each and every week. You can subscribe monthly. That's $3 a week. 12 is what you get charged at the end of each month. And or actually, it's just when you sign up. So it's not even at the end sometimes. If you did it now, it would be closer to the end of the month just because of how the calendar falls and whatnot. But otherwise, you can just sign up for an annual plan. It's a set it and forget it option. Look, if you support this show, if you like this show, if you never want to be out of the loop on a news story, if you always want to make sure that you know what is happening, there's only one thing to do. Get that annual plan. But if you would like to have your name read at the end of every free show on this program, well, only one place to do it. That is also at Take Politics Seriously. But when you're at the subscription, you head on over to the founding tier and you sign up there. It's a little pricey, but these people have spent one amount of money, and for the rest of the year, they get their name read. They are what we like to call the Titanic $10 tier. L3PO, Peepaw, Scott, Middle-Aged Mike, Tom, Sarah Jeannie, Jeremy, Pro Idiot, Chiller Tomatoes, oh yeah, it's Adam, Neil, AB Puppy, Dr. Whiskey, Michael, Fat Tony's PJs from New York, Will, The Borge B, Matthew, Matt, Andrew, Edwin, Sam, Andrew, Phil, Edison, Devon, Paul, a dog named Checkers, Gloria, Jerry, Trucker, John, Berkeley Steven, and Zombie Doc. You want your name on the list? One place to do it. TakePoliticsSeriously.com. On Friday's edition of the show, we welcome back the great and powerful Michael Cohen. He is the man who wrote the book on the modern political campaign, and we are celebrating that he's got a new edition of that book out next month. It's got a really cool cover. I really like it. I like him. It's a good time. But that is then. Until then, this is your old pal Justin Robert Young saying some shows talk about politics, others talk about politics, and still more discuss politics. But this is the only show that dares discuss. Oh, 3.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.
Dog and Pony Show audio.